hope you can get the rest of them in. So animal tracking is the best way for most of us to see how animals live their lives. There are lots of other purposes of tracking, but for me, it's really to have a window into nature and how things work, how animals survive, what they do. This is going to be, it's hard to know how to start in a tracking thing. Do you go by groups of animals, or do you go by habitats? Or, well, I'm doing it different from either of those two. I'm going to do it in two large groups of animals. Animals that mostly walk and animals that mostly bound. And on the screen, your screen, you should see trails crossing, one of which is an animal that is more of a walker. That would be, where's my pointer? This coyote that it actually trotted. This is actually a trot coming from the upper left and going to the lower right. And this is a cottontail rabbit coming from the upper right and going to the lower left. So why divide it into those groups? Because you can see the difference really easily if an animal is moving at its normal gait. So the coyote is, each mark in the snow is pretty much equidistant from each mark ahead of it and behind it. So the separation distance is the same. You could measure what's called stride back here on the trail or up here. You'd come up with a very similar measurement. I'll get back to a little bit of the details of that in a bit. So in this case, there are 4 tracks all clustered together, and then there's a big space before the next cluster of 4 tracks. So that's a very different kind of organization, and it's really easy to see the difference. This happens to be a cottontail rabbit, as I said. So we're going to start with what I'm calling the bounders, and that will be a kind of unrelated group of animals, really. It'll be just animals that move that way. And then we'll be looking at walkers and trotters, we could call them. And that's a whole other group of mostly unrelated animals. Although there are some bodily similarities that you could say. So let's get going here. Okay, are you going to work? Oh, why are you? Oh, why doesn't my thing? There we go. Okay. So here's a cottontail group of 4, and it's pretty much the same arrangement as you saw in the first slide. The direction of travel is from right to left, and these are the front feet, these are the rear feet. So you're looking in the direction down the trail as the animal was moving, and you're going to see the back feet out in front of this group of 4 tracks. The reason for that is the animal lands from a leap onto its front feet, and the back feet pass outside. The right goes outside there, the left goes outside there to land ahead of the front feet so it can take off in another jump. Now that's a common trait for a lot of these animals that I'm grouping together in this group of animals. All right, rabbits are not the only bounders, not the only common bounders that we have. So how do we tell them from other ones? See how pointy the tips of the feet are in these tracks? These are the front, and they kind of come to a point. And in the rear, also, they sort of come to a point. That's going to be important. And also notice how kind of fuzzy the inside of the track is. Not very distinct in there. Where are the toes? What's going on there? You really can't see much detail. That will be important too. to tell it apart from another very, very common bounder. So rabbits can also put their front feet down right next to each other. So this is a rabbit again, and here are the back feet out ahead of these two front feet. Sometimes these two front feet are sitting right next to each other so tightly that it just looks like one sort of weird looking track. Here's another bounder, but that's not a rabbit, that is a squirrel. And the difference, a major difference to help you tell the difference between a rabbit and a squirrel in the snow is how these front feet sit. Even though this rabbit put them next to each other instead of one ahead of the other, they're really tight together. Here are the front feet of the squirrel, back feet, and again, this is the direction of travel up that way. But there's this little sort of ridge of snow that goes partly through, and it actually went through farther, and it sort of fell apart, separating the feet. Squirrels put their front feet down separated instead of tightly together. Let's look back at this one. Even though the left front leads the right front, if you think of a line that goes right down the middle of the trail, the front feet touch it. The inside of the right front touches it, the inside of the left front touches it. So they're still held tightly together, just one landed ahead of the other. Okay, so rabbit, squirrel. Here's our typical squirrel pattern in the snow, bounding in that direction, and you can see that separation of the front feet, bounding up and over and off to wherever it wanted to go. If you get snow that takes detail, and that snow that second rabbit slide was in, that was nice detailed snow if you had details to show. It didn't show the same kind of detail as this squirrel does because the rabbit's feet are very furry underneath, and squirrels have bare toes. There might be a little fur in between, but the toes themselves are bare so that you can see the toes very well. And that lets you get this shape of the front foot of a squirrel. This is a gray squirrel. 4 toes. Then these are middle pads behind the toes, and these are heel pads. So again, here's the right front, 4 toes, and you can see a few claw marks here. Middle pads, heel pads. That's the typical front foot of many rodents. The back feet have 5 toes. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there are the middle pads, and you don't see any heel pad because the gray squirrel doesn't have any heel pads. So the 3 central toes in the back foot tend to be tight together, kind of the toes themselves are parallel, so the tips of them that make these little marks in the snow sit all lined up with each other, whereas the outer toe and the inner toe tend to be stick out to the side or separated at least from these. And here again is that typical squirrel and relative, all of its relatives pattern. The direction of travel is toward the top of the screen. The rear feet are out ahead. The front feet are behind, but separated. Now we have deep snow out there. So I decided at the last minute, I better get some deep snow illustrations, because you're probably not going to see much in the way of detailed tracks like these previous slides for a while. Or if you had a kind of an ideal situation where the snow got thin or little added layer of new snow, you might. But a lot of what you see in the next few weeks is going to be just lots of big holes in the snow. So here is a squirrel moving through deep snow. All you see is 2 marks. So what happened? Where's this 4-track pattern? When the snow gets deep, lots of animals conserve energy by using the same holes for both front and back feet. So the front feet came down. They might have been a little closer together when they hit, but they made holes about in these places, and then the back feet came right on top of them, just leaving 2 marks, both the left front and the left rear. Here's the right front and the right rear. And we know that it's going this way, not so much from this pattern in here, because that's kind of what'll happen a lot is after the animal's been in the snow, it's leaving, the snow falls back in, and so you don't see much down here in the bottom. But as it left out of the snow, snow fell off of its legs and its body out here in the direction of travel. Whoops, sorry. Need to stop doing that. Okay, so, and we're going to see that happening again, so I'll mention that again. Oh, let's not leave that one quite yet. Notice that the kind of, it's kind of a 4-square pattern. It comes in, leaving a kind of disturbance over on this side and a disturbance over on this side. So it looks, has kind of a rectangular look. Here's the rabbit in deep snow. The front feet come down close together, remember, so they're not going to be separated, making a kind of narrow pit in the snow. And then the back feet come in, set out ahead of the front feet, and they're wider. And then here's the exit groove. And again, you can see as the rabbit lifted out of the snow, it dropped a bunch of snow here in the direction of travel. So you get this more triangular effect when the rabbit is negotiating deep snow. Here's another bounder, a smaller rodent, white-footed mouse, and it's doing pretty much the same thing that that squirrel did in the deep snow. It's just making 2 holes, one for the feet on the right side, the other for the feet on the left side. And white-footed mice have such beautiful long tails, and when they're hitting deep snow, well, it's deep for a mouse. Maybe this snow wouldn't be deep for, you know, a dog, but it's deep for a mouse. The tail hits the snow as the animals goes in and comes out, and it's doing a little bit of balancing. The tail is helping it to keep its balance, so it may turn, you know, fly out to one side or another. So this mouse bounded, land, bound, land, just like larger rodents do. Sometimes mice don't take such long leaps. In fact, most of the time they actually don't. These are mouse trails coming out of a hollow next to a tree up here at the upper right, and well, maybe coming out and going in, because it's hard to tell what direction they're going. But the trails are short leaps. Let's take one that's kind of isolated. This one is just a single trail. And I say that because it looks to me like 2 trails overlapped here. So here's a single mouse trip, leaping at pretty regular intervals down this little slope, out coming down from this little hole in the snow. And this is a really common track to see. I call it like a zipper track because they remind me of zippers. Very common type of trail for a mouse to leave. And these, when I say mouse, I'm not talking about a house mouse. I'm talking about our wild mice, the deer mice, or the white-footed mice. So here's another bounding trail in the snow, and it's about the size of a mouse trail, but this one has a very different rhythm. Short leap, even pushing through the snow here, a very short leap, then a longer leap, and then here's another groove in the snow. This is a mouse chaser, actually. This is a weasel, about the same size. This is probably a short-tailed weasel, and its body width is about the same as a mouse. So it is able to follow a mouse into its holes wherever a mouse can go, this little weasel can go. And the best way to tell the difference between a mouse trail and a weasel trail, because after all, how would you know which one it was just from this one? But it's the unequal lengths of leap that give the weasel away. A mouse is not going to be nearly as erratic in the length of its leaps. And since we're talking about weasels, we're into a whole other group of bounders, and that is the Mustelids. Those are the mink family, minks, weasels, fishers, otters, all members of the Mustelid family. This is certainly one of those bounding type trails, because here are all the footprints, and then there's a space, and all the feet land in here, all the feet land in there. Here again, here's that little telltale directional signal. As it's coming out of the snow, it drops a little bit off its body. This is a fisher. And when the snow is deep, just like all other animals, it condenses its track pattern so that the back feet can come in where the front feet have already made holes in the snow. Now, a very important signal for a Fischer trail is the fact that one side leads the other. So here in this hole, both the right front and the right rear feet came in, but the left front landed a little ahead of the right front, so the track is actually behind, because the first one to hit will be the one that is behind the second one to hit. So left front hits, right front hits, and then the left rear comes in here and the right rear comes in there. It's hard to explain gaits without a little bit of diagrams and play acting, but maybe we can explain that a little more if people have questions. So anyway, bounding fisher with some place to go. It's very purposeful. And I don't know really what sorts of woods and experiences you've had, but many people have seen fishers. Fishers were extirpated from our whole region for most of the 20th century and returned just around the turn of the century, probably, on their own, and now are inhabitants of all of our woodlands. So you may even get a visual sighting of a fisher on your travels. The fisher, like other mustelids, has 5 toes on all of its feet. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And when conditions are favorable for easy movement, it moves in more of what we call a lope. So a collection of 4 tracks, front feet and rear feet, all in this group here, but stretched out and not bunched up into that bound that we just saw. And the sequence would be, let's see, what are we doing here? Left front, and that's the right front. Here's the left rear. Ooh, wait a minute, that's probably the right rear, and that's the left rear. Here's the right front, right rear, left rear. Now that's the pattern on the ground. So that the sequence that I'm naming is not always the sequence of footfalls. The first foot to fall has to be a front foot, and that would be the right front. The next track you see is actually the right rear, but that's not the next foot to fall. Be the right front, left front hit down, then the right rear and the left rear hit the ground. So it's still in that bounding group because we have groups of 4 tracks separated by a space and then another group of 4 tracks. Sometimes, well, Fisher's feet are quite furry, and very often we don't see the toes clearly marked or showing in a trail. This is a Fisher again, but it's kind of fuzzed out because of all the fur on the feet. And there are actually 4 tracks in this group. This is the right front. The left front touched there, and then the left rear touched right on top of it, and then the right rear. So you're going to see a lot of different types of patterns, especially in an animal like a Fisher, because it has a lot of different ways it can move. Sometimes you'll come across something that tells you more than just what the animal is. Here's a Fischer Trail proceeding from left to right. Here you can pretty clearly see the 4 separated prints. Here they're not showing 4, there's 2, one on top of each other in each of these. But what's interesting is that each time the Fisher lands, there's this little strike in the snow up here. But it's flying through the air for another landing, and here's this little thing in the snow up here. That is a prey animal that the Fisher caught and is carrying. It probably has the animal gripped in its teeth somewhere on the back and something that's hanging out on the side. If it's a rabbit, it might be a foot. If it's, I don't know, if it was a, say, a muskrat, it could be a tail. Who knows what it is? But whenever the Fisher is landing from its bound, this thing that's hanging down strokes the snow. In fact, there are 2 marks here. There's a lighter one below the heavier one. So we don't know what the animal it caught is, and we don't know exactly what's hitting the snow, but we know that Fisher has something it's carrying, possibly back to a den. Fishers also like to leave messages for other Fishers. So a Fisher approached this hump. They like stumps and humps and things that stick out of the snow, and rubbed its body on the stump, knocking the snow off and kind of smoothing it out. Here's a few toes from one of its feet. It rubs its belly over this stump. Sometimes if it's really excited, it'll pee there or leave a little scat there, but it's leaving its scent as a signal to other Fishers. Now this can be, I'm here, keep your distance, this is my territory, but it also might be, I'm looking for a mate, are you interested? So it can be either a territorial signal or a mating signal. The mink is another member of the Mustelid family, and here are some mink tracks. Again, a group of 4, left front, left rear, right rear. You can see the cute little toes just right there. Minks don't have furry feet the way Fishers do, so it's easier to find tracks where you can really see the toes. And another member of the Mustelid family that we have that's so much fun to find is the otter. And this is a slide that an otter made. It was out in Danby State Forest in Michigan Hollow, and it was sliding. It wasn't really very steep. It just, they can slide on level or even sometimes a little uphill. So it's just sliding down here, walks a little bit through there and then slides again, pushes a little bit and then another slide. You can see a few tracks along the edge. Okay, we're done with bounders, and we're into walkers. And of course, birds are walkers by default because they only have 2 legs like us. This is a grouse, and it's left, right, left, right, just the way we would walk. And the reason I like this slide is because it also shows you the extra scales that stick out from the side of the feet that give it more buoyancy in snow in the winter. So these, instead of being skinny bird toes, they are sort of widened out. But if you have 4 legs, each step of your walk is going to involve 2 feet, a front and a rear from the same side. So this is an opossum, and each of these tracks has a front, which is going to be this more, well, let's see, like a sunburst pattern. These are the front toes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then it's going to have a rear foot somewhere close to that front, but not necessarily on top of it. Here's a really good rear foot. That's the inner toe, which is like our thumb. Then the rear foot has 3 toes that are sort of close together and a 5th one that sticks out to the side. So Possum Trails, really the thing that always triggers me to think I might be looking at an opossum trail is they just look weird. So the front foot here is showing out in front. Here's the left front, you can see the toes there. And then with that back foot partly on top of it, it just has this, you know, basically strange look. So a walking 4-footed animal is always going to have some kind of a zigzag effect because the legs on one side generally don't cross over. Sometimes in a little stretch of trail you will have where maybe they line up with each other or they fall a little bit to the other side, but overall you'll be able to figure out which side is which by looking for this zigzag. Here's a bobcat walking, and in this case the bobcat is doing something that is very habitual for a bobcat. It's doing what we call an overstep walk. So it still has a zigzag. If you take these 2 together, to get to the next set you have to sort of zig over this way and then zag back over that way. The front foot on the right side in this case comes down and the back foot just comes right past before it lands. So that's the overstep. The back foot oversteps the front foot. And then here again, this is the left front foot and that's the left back foot. And that you'll see, if you have cats around, you'll see them doing the same thing. It's a very feline thing to do. Okay, so we're into a bunch of walkers. Here's a right front bobcat track. And let's notice a few things about that. First of all, there's a leading toe. If you, in this case, if you hold up your own right hand, tuck your thumb under so you can't see it, you'll have a leading finger that corresponds to that leading toe. And you'll also have a little finger on the outside that's farther behind all of your other 3 fingers. So this is what we call asymmetry, and it's not like a weird thing that happens in the track. It's actually the way a cat's foot is shaped. And if you can find a cat, and if it will tolerate you looking at the underside of its foot, you'll see that there is an asymmetry there. And the asymmetry also shows up in the middle pad. There's 2 lobes in the front, and one of them is ahead of the other. And it's a little bit canted so that the left side, in this case, is a little ahead of the right side. The whole thing is very asymmetrical. Here's a place where a bobcat sat. These are the back legs. The hock would have been back there. A little bit of the kind of fur was making a mark here. And these are the true front feet. And again, look at that asymmetry. Look at that leading toe. And now that I'm talking about this, I realize I need to go back and point out one other thing about a bobcat's foot. In the winter, they have a lot of hair on and around their foot. And very often in their tracks, you'll see an extra kind of pushed out area in the snow. That is called the hair halo. And it's because of that hair that is on and around the foot that makes a little, I don't know, bevel in the snow around the actual toes of the track. Okay. Well, different group of walkers. These are canines. These tracks belong to a coyote, and these tracks belong to a red fox. So a very noticeable difference between these canine tracks and the feline tracks we were just looking at. These are symmetrical. If you imagine a line that goes right down through the center of that track, you could fold one half of it over on the other half and it would exactly superimpose. Try doing that on this bobcat track. Because of the asymmetry, if you folded it over, this toe would not land on that toe, it would land out in front. None of the track would actually fold over onto the other half. Canines have symmetrical feet and symmetrical tracks, so you can look at any of these tracks. This is a rear, and see, imagine that line up through the middle and see how symmetrical it is. There's another beautiful thing in these tracks, and that is what we call the canine X. Because the front toes tend to hold tightly together, they make a kind of depression, the two of them, that looks just like one depression. So if you look at the ridges between the middle pad, the outer toe, these two toes together, and the other outer toe, you get an X shape. That is something you don't see at all in cat tracks. Any kind of cat, house cat, puma, bobcat, anything. So obviously the coyote is bigger than the red fox. You can see very nice, clearly outlined toes on the coyote, very nice, clean, outlined pad. In the fox, it's a little fuzzier, and that's because foxes, red foxes, also have a lot of fur on the bottoms of their feet, especially in the winter. So the clean outlines of toes, the way you see them in the coyote toes, you're going to have fuzzier outlines. Both of the red fox and the coyote are sort of oval or oblong in overall shape. If you imagine a line that goes around the whole track, it's kind of oval or oblong. And the toes are nice and tight. They're the side toes are sort of tucked nicely in behind the leading toes, and the middle pads are quite small. You can see a few claw marks. These are the claw marks of the leading toes, but maybe you can often find tracks of wild canines where you don't see claw marks at all, or just barely. I don't see claw marks on these outer toes, and only just little pricks very tight together, pointing straight forward for the leading toes. Those are all marks of wild canines in general. So they apply to both the fox and the coyote. Here's something that only applies to the fox. This line that cuts through the middle pad there, that is a callousy kind of eruption that sticks through the fur. So all other than this, the whole bottom of the foot is pretty much covered with fur. But this sticks out and it makes a mark in nice tracking conditions, which this snow was, that you can see. It's only in the front foot, and it's only present in the red fox. So there's a whole lot of stuff about coyotes and red foxes. Here are our two foxes. Over here is the red fox, and again, there's that bar in the pad, and the kind of fuzzed out impressions of toes. This is a front, and that's a rear. And right next to it, these are gray fox tracks. This is a gray fox front, and that is a gray fox rear. Now, it's not really much different, but the gray fox toes in general are usually more clearly delineated because they are not as furry as the red fox. So here's a coyote proceeding along, and it comes to this stump, and what are we see some extra prints here, and it makes any tracker say, okay, what's happening there? What it did was it stopped to make a scent mark. So it stopped with a front foot somewhere up here, probably there, and a rear foot there, raised its leg just like that was a fire hydrant, and squirted its urine over that way. And because we see the urine off to the side, we know that that was a male coyote. And this is mating season for foxes and coyotes. So if you're out about in the snow and you see canine trails that seem to be heading toward little stumps or little things protruding from the snow, go check it out. You might find a scent mark. And we need to mention the fact that dog tracks can usually be separated from wild canine tracks for several reasons. One is the middle pad is usually much bigger. Wild canines put more weight on their toes. They don't weight their pads nearly as much. So their pads tend to be small and in some cases hardly visible. The other big thing about dog tracks is these massive claws. Since dogs depend on their masters for cutting their claws, which we usually don't do as often as we should, their claws get thick and robust instead of those delicate claw marks that we saw in the coyote and the red fox. There are lots of behavioral differences between dogs and wild canines. We can talk about them if we have time at the end. The main thing is the weighting of the feet, and also that the trails are not nearly as precise in dogs. So we're talking about these animals that tend to walk as their default gait. That doesn't mean they can't do other gaits. It just means that when they're not in a hurry and they're comfortable, that's walk is what they do. This is a red fox walking, and you can see that there is a zigzag effect, even though at some points it's kind of straight, but there is a zigzag and it heads down there. Here's a deer walking, big zigzag, much more spread out zigzag. In the kind of snow that we have out there now, you may not see details like the two toes of the deer, but you can probably tell the difference between a canine track, a coyote, for instance, and a deer by the width of that zigzag, which is going to be a lot more, lot wider in the deer than the coyote. Animals that walk, of course, can also go faster. And when they do, that's when we start getting into an area where the bounders and the walkers aren't as different as we started out thinking. So here is a coyote galloping. In fact, it's increasing its speed, left front, right rear, left rear, and then it kind of stretches out, left front, right rear, left rear. So it's increasing speed. You have the 4 prints of a group here, and then a space, and the animal's airborne in that space, and then there's another group, somewhat like the groupings that you would see in what we consider a bounder. The 4 prints and a space. This happens to be a mink. 4 prints and a space. So animals that bound can stretch out and look like they're galloping, like a dog or a horse sometimes. Animals that walk can almost bound. This is closer to a bound when they're accelerating or jumping uphill. So these distinctions, this distinction that I started out with isn't really an absolute distinction. It's just what, when we talk about a habitual default gait, which is different for, say, a squirrel than it would be for a deer. So yeah, there's probably lots more that we should talk about with that too, but we'll keep going so that we cover a little more of this. So here's another deep snow picture that I added because I realized we are going to be out there seeing these kinds of tracks a lot. This is a fox walking in deep snow. So each hole is a set of feet from the same side, just like in a regular walk. So this would be right front and right rear, left front, left rear, right front, right rear, just the same thing. And you can see the zigzag. The steps in deep snow will be shorter, and there might be a little bit of dragging. Considering the depth of this snow for this animal, the fact that it dragged a little bit isn't surprising. If this were a dog or a deer, there would probably be a really big dragging groove between these tracks on the same side. So you're going to be seeing these kinds of trails out there. Here's a deer getting through deep snow in another way, and that is it's coming from the upper left, it's heading toward the lower right. It's just landing like a squirrel would, like a bound. Front feet and then rear feet, and just leaping from one landing spot to the next. And again, this is really an obvious illustration of what I was saying about direction. So as it's coming out of that hole in the deep snow, it's dropping a lot of snow before it hits the next one. Animals that have short legs and still have to get through the snow, like this skunk, just plow through. They just make a groove of snow, groove in the snow. This skunk was walking, and it's still making a zigzag. Here, for this animal with shorter legs, shorter, wider, more chunky body, the zigzag is, the steps are shorter and the zigzag is wider. So you get a different overall feeling for this zigzag. And you're going to see deer beds if you're lucky enough to come across a spot where a deer has slept. And there's some interesting things to see in a deer bed. usually you will see one part of it, say 1/3 of it, is circular or elliptical maybe, and if you could feel this, if you could put your hand down in here, it would be hard and icy. That's where the back of the deer was while it slept. Up here, you have knees, the deer's 2 knees. Its front end was up on this end, and its shoulder was somewhere over here. And then back here, there's the mark of one of its hocks. So picture the body of the deer. It's curled up, the back is curled up, the head is somewhere up here, then its knees and the legs are folded back, so you're just seeing the knees, and then that's the lower leg. And then the back leg folded up like that. Now, after the deer has been there for a while and slept there, the snow gets compressed inside, and it kind of gets warmed up and softened a little bit. So it's not icy like this when the deer is on it. It's warmed and softened. When the deer stands up in this nice softened snow, you usually find at least one stand-up track, and that's this one. That would be the back foot as it was standing up, and here's another stand-up track up here. And the reason these stand-up tracks are so beautifully detailed is because the snow was just soft enough to take a really good track, and then it all froze. So this, if you put your fingers in there, it would be all icy down inside the track. Anything else about that? Yeah. Sometimes the deer will be sleeping for a while, and it'll stand up and turn around and sleep in a different position. And then it's really hard to figure out which part was where, because you have different, it doesn't come out in a sort of simple diagnosis like this one. Oh, another track that we might see around is a porcupine. And this is another walking animal. So here's a walk sequence. This actually happens to be a separate movement, but in each of these sets, this is a rear foot and that's a front foot. And the claws of the front feet of a porcupine are very, very long. Here's another front foot. Really long claws, are way out ahead of the pad of the foot. You can see a little bit of the toes behind the claws. The claws of the back foot don't reach out quite as far ahead of the pad of the foot. So this was, let's see. Oh, actually, no, I think I'm gonna put these two together because this is a left rear and a left front, and that's a right rear and a right front. Raccoon tracks, you may see them in warm periods. If it's cold, bitter cold weather, they'll be tucked away in a hollow tree or somewhere just in a torpor. But when it's milder, on milder days, and of course later on as winter starts to wane, they will be out. So we could say this is we could say in a way this is a walking animal, but it's not the same kind of walk. It's something called a pace walk. So in these sets of 2, one is a front and one is a rear. This is the right rear, that's the left front. This is the right front, and that's the left rear. So the diagnostic feature for the raccoon movement at the pace walk is these sets of 2. One is the front and one is the rear, but in the next set, it's the front from the other side and the rear from the other side. And here's another thing to keep in mind with raccoon tracks. Remember back in the beginning, we saw the Fischer bound and one side was leading the other. Sometimes raccoon tracks will look a little bit like Fischer tracks, but in the raccoon movement, the leading side always switches at the next set of tracks. So here the leading side is on the left. This raccoon, of course, was going that way. I should have said that in the beginning. So here it's the leading side is the left rear. Up here, the leading one is the right rear, and again, the left rear. And it alternates regularly for the raccoon. For a Fischer, it may switch the leading side every once in a while, but it doesn't alternate at every other group. And something that you will see in the next few weeks, maybe, depending on the weather, is signs that the woodchucks are arousing themselves. So here's a woodchuck burrow, and here are the muddy tracks of the woodchuck. Their tracks, a woodchuck is very closely related to squirrels, and so their tracks, here's a front woodchuck track that looks a lot like the front track of that squirrel way back in the beginning. And I had one last one, yeah, muskrat. Another walker, so it's going in that direction, and it's a zigzag. Again, it's like the skunk, a very fat-bodied and short-legged animal, so kind of a wide, close zigzag. And very often, you'll see the tail dragging in the middle. This is a tail mark. And that is it, just about the right time to stop and see if things were confusing at all or if there are questions.
There were a couple questions in the chat, Linda, that I will just two. One fairly early on, why don't the animals with furry feet have trouble with snowballs?
Oh, that is a good question. And you know, I'm going to actually ask the opposite question. Why don't the animals with non-furry feet have trouble with snowballs? Because that's what dogs' feet are furred, pretty much like coyotes' feet are. Fur in between the toes, but bare skin on the toes. So both questions are interesting. I'm thinking, this is just a speculation on my part, but I'm thinking that the fur insulates the feet so well that the snow doesn't melt and collect in ice balls because they're insulated. Do coyotes get ice balls in their toes? Geez, I don't even know about that. I know my dog does. That's a fascinating question.
Another one from a little further back was from Roger Hopkins. He says he sees some walking deer tracks with distinct steps and others dragging their feet between steps. This is in the same snow depth. What is the difference?
Yeah, what is the difference? I have seen the same thing. Sometimes you see deer trails where they're very crisp, like the fox, you know, even in deeper snow, they're lifting their feet. And sometimes they're just dragging even in like 4 inches of snow. Is it age or condition? Something we don't know about the health status of the deer? That's a good question too, and I can't answer it.
Well, Linda, we need to search this further. My son-in-law says that the dragging tracks are made by bucks and the walking tracks are made by does. So that's one man's opinion, and he's my son-in-law, and he knows a lot about animals, but that's an interesting difference. Thank you.
And up to a certain point, that could be true. The sexual differences between males and females are at their height during the rut, where the weight, the muscling of the buck and the antlers and everything is, you know, vastly different from the muscling or lack of it in the doe. But after the rut's over, all that stuff subsides. So by this time of year, although there's a size difference on average, I don't think that there's that much in the way of relative weight, front and rear, and all of that sort of stuff, the hormonal stuff. That has really dissipated. The antlers are gone, and they're not that different. And I have to tell you, Sue Morse, who's a really wonderful tracker that I've been out with quite a bit, she made a list of, what, 25 or so different things that people said are the way to tell a male from a female. And none of them hold true absolutely all the time. I guess that's the way to say it. So you'd have to kind of know the deer in your area. You have to know, I think, what's happening at the time of year. And a lot of it is kind of woods lore that is hard to corroborate with data.
All right, Barbara Lobb asks, not related to tracks, but is it mating season for squirrels? Does anyone know that one?
Not yet, not quite yet. In a month or so, yeah. They're not going to want to push the season because if they do, there's insufficient food. And the worst time for finding food is at the end of winter and early spring. So squirrel birthing is going to be a little later than that, and therefore mating is going to be a little later.
Katie Cody asked, did you show a beaver? She apologizes, she got in late, so she just wondered if a beaver was in the presentation. She's going to watch it later.
No, I didn't, unfortunately. I have a lot of great beaver tracks in mud. The ones that I have in snow, I looked at them and said, I don't want to show that, it's not good enough. So so I didn't show a beaver. You're not going to see, well, it depends on what's happening with the weather. But it's less likely to see beaver and muskrat tracks at this time of the winter, because if they've got things figured out right, the beaver has a store of food under the ice that it prepared in the fall, and it has a lodge where it can stay above water level. It can go exit its lodge under the ice, swim to its food, grab a branch, take it back to the lodge, and sit there and eat it. It can do that for weeks and weeks and weeks without ever coming out on the surface. The reason we do sometimes find beaver and muskrat tracks in the snow at this time of year is if some disaster happened to their food supply, the water rose or fell, the water level, something that upset the situation that a beaver wants to have, which is never to have to come out onto the snow surface. It's extremely vulnerable. You know, it can't really escape very well at all. And the same goes for the muskrat if it has to expose itself like that. So we see less of them in the winter, although obviously from this slide it happens. Yeah.
Margie Rixford asks, the photo with the large spaces, did you say this is where deer laid down? She had several spots like this near her pond, and would multiple deer lay down?
Oh, yes. And yes, that what I call a deer bed is that, I hope that's what she means. That's where they lie down. And either it can be a day bed, which is usually in really good cover and not necessarily that easy to find, or it can be a sort of intermittently used night bed where it doesn't need so much cover because it's dark. Usually male deer are kind of out on their own at this time of year. It's the does and their young of the year that will be together in groups at this time of year. And very often you find 3, 4, 5 beds all kind of in the same area together, probably a doe and offspring, or 2 does and their offspring. And if it's near a person's house, and the deer kind of know the people and the people know the deer, they might sleep there many nights or days if it's day beds, if they're comfortable that the people aren't, you know, a threat.
Steve Kinney asks, are there any particularly good apps to aid in identifying tracks by photo? The iNaturalist app does pretty well with some.
Yeah, that's a good issue. I'm into books, really. I like something I can carry in my pack. There are certainly good apps. There are certainly good websites for studying tracks. When you're out in the field and you really want to figure out a track, I find apps hard to negotiate, I guess. That's one of the things. There's too much there. You don't even really know where to start. And the other thing is, well, in those days when it's 10 or 15 degrees, does your phone work? Mine sure doesn't. So there's a weather issue there too.
Are there books that you would recommend? Do you
Okay.
have
I wrote a book, and I wrote it because I wanted to have something that would be portable and give you the tools to identify just tracks. It's not about everything else, all the sign and all the lifestyles and everything. It's just tracks, and it's composed of drawings that are based on hundreds of photographs. So I kind of collapsed down the key points into drawings for each animal, and I included anywhere between 7 and 12 or 13 drawings for each animal, because the problem with tracks is they're never perfect. The ones that show up in most books are the absolutely perfect tracks with all the details, and usually the ones you see in the field aren't perfect or aren't complete. So what I wanted to do in my book was provide enough drawings that you would be able to see the essence of a track, even though it was distorted or missing parts. So I have a lot of variations. So I guess for a reference book, I would suggest Mark Elbrock. Animal Tracks and Sign, I think it's called. And for a field book, I like my own. I think
Well, you got a couple of endorsements in the chat, so we will we'll figure out how we can in our follow-up message after this direct people to your book and where they might be able to purchase it.
Well, I have a website, and they will find out about the book there, and it's lindajspielman.com. Perhaps you could put that up on the screen. I should have.
We'll send that out.
Yeah, you have to have the J in there, or you'll get a social worker in Texas or something like that. So, Linda J. Spielman.
Another question was, what are the large bloody-like patches one sees by deer tracks in the spring?
That is your deer urine. Depending on what they eat, their urine can be different colors. Sometimes it's blue, and sometimes it's orangey red or yellow. Depends what they eat. They're in winter and early spring, they're chewing on buds and twigs, trying to get living cambium cells, which is a lot of stuff they can't use for any nutritious food that's in there, which is why actually deer at the end of the winter are generally in poor nutrient status. And depending on what they actually end up eating, their urine can turn some weird colors.
All right, we have a couple of comments that I don't think are questions. Somebody commented on the dragging. Hunter told her that deer feet are bucks, tracks not dragging feet are does. Katie posted a link to
You mean
something.
the opposite? Wait a minute. Is that, you're saying the opposite of Rogers?
Oh, she said, yeah, the dragging feeder bucks,
Okay, all
tracks
right.
not dragging our does. Isn't that what Roger said too?
Yes, yes, yes,
We've got
yes.
two people. That's their anecdotal. That's their
I
answer.
know that's one that goes around. I'm just saying the farther along you get in the year, the less distinctive are those different walks. So by the end of the winter, all the deer are tired and you know, malnourished basically.
Katie Cody posted a link to something in Field and Stream. I think is about the same issue. If anyone wants to check that out. And then the last question that I'm seeing, I'm sorry if I missed any, is I have a bazillion deer tracks in my yard and deer beds. I also find areas where there are digging scratches in the snow. I assume they're looking for grass. Is that the case, or is it some other behavioral thing?
It is, they're looking for grass. They dig in the snow to, I've seen deer digging for a lot of different food items. So yes, in fields where they're, say in a mowed lawn, they will dig for grass. Deer are browsers, not grazers. They're not like horses. They don't actually live on grass. But in the winter, any green thing, they're hungry for anything. And they do, as I said, they start suffering from malnourishment. And so they do dig for grass, I think, as much for the a little bit of correction to their vitamin status as for food. In the woods, a lot of the digging they do is for acorns. If it's a good acorn year, squirrels take some of them, and a lot of them just lie under the leaf litter after the leaves fall. And I think that, and here's just a theory of mine, red oak acorns are the ones that last. The white oak acorns sprout immediately, so they're no good unless they're eaten right away. The red oak acorns lie there under the leaf litter after leaf fall. The rain soaks them, takes out some of the tannins, which make them very bitter and unpalatable. And by midwinter, they may be more palatable to deer, which is about when they usually start digging them up. So if you're skiing in the woods and you see these large areas where the leaves are all sort of tossed around, the snow's dug through, look and see if it's under oak trees, because if it's under oak trees, it's acorns the deer are after. Another thing that they selectively dig for is ferns, especially, I think, Christmas ferns. And ferns that have these kind of, okay. Some ferns have like a very tight clump of buds at the base that sit there in the winter, and there are some green fronds, some little green sort of fiddleheady things that sit there over the winter. The deer go for them, and somehow they can smell them and dig where they are and eat those little fiddleheady things that are on them. And the other thing that I just discovered a few weeks ago, I was walking in an area where there had been some habitation, you know, back in the 20th century, early 20th century. People had subsistence farms in the area, and there was a lot of periwinkle. You can always tell where there's been a homestead because there's things there that shouldn't be there, like lilac bushes and apple trees and periwinkle. And the deer were just going crazy eating the periwinkle. They were just digging all around. There's some very large patches of periwinkle, and they were eating it. So yeah, they dig for a lot of different things to supplement their major diet of bark and buds.
All right, there was one more question that came in after I saw that. First of all, there's a link in here. Roger Hopkins shared a link to your website, Linda, so everybody can get it there, but we will also send it out via email afterwards. But Eric asked, do any animals you know of use tracks for visual navigation / trail making?
Not quite understanding the question.
I don't know if Eric is still here. Eric, you want to unmute yourself and
Sure, yeah. So I'm wondering if there are any animals that kind of create paths and then follow paths. So if they're looking
Okay,
for a
got
food
it.
source and they're following other animals' tracks or trails.
Okay, deer absolutely, especially in snow that we have now, they will more and more follow trails they've already made. And if this snow stays around, and if we get more snow, they'll actually start yarding up, which means that they'll go into more sheltered places, which is generally under conifers, mostly hemlocks, and they'll have kind of trails that weave around in there. They'll stick around in there. They'll eat everything they can reach, and they will just sort of stay there, or use trails that they've made, short trails that leave the area a little bit, but they'll stick to already beaten down trails. And this all has to do with poor nutritional status and needing to conserve their energy. Rabbits make trails in cover, areas of cover, and just use the same trails. Canines, foxes and coyotes, will follow deer trails because it's easier to use them than to break through 2 feet of snow to make their own trails. What else? What other animals? Porcupines. Oh yeah, their porcupines will sit in a tree for a couple of days eating hemlock twigs, and then use the same trail to leave that tree to go to another tree if they can. They'll just use the same trails they've already made. Yeah, I can think of several examples where animals tend to use trails that they've already made or that other animals have made. Yeah.
You know, Linda, I think you also find if you are out snowshoeing today, if you go back tomorrow, you'll find deer tracks in your snowshoe track.
In the snowshoe, yeah. Oh, I've made a snowshoe trail on purpose because I wanted to have it easier. So, you know, go out one day and kind of go out and wander around, come back, and then want to go out on the same trail. And there's a fox using my trail. So absolutely. And here's another thing. The day after a storm, nothing's moving at all. Yesterday, it was snowing up until, when did it stop? I don't know. And then blowing. Today, I was out, really nothing was doing anything. They were all just holed up because the snow was so deep, so light. It would have been such a struggle. Now today it got above freezing, the sun was shining, the snow consolidated. If you go out tomorrow, you're going to start seeing lots of trails. And it'll snow a little bit maybe overnight, but not anything significant. The next day, it'll be even better. As the snow consolidates, the animals can move without spending so much energy, and you'll start finding a lot more movement.
Well, that's it for our questions in chat. If anybody else has questions, you can feel free to unmute yourself, and maybe we've got just a few more minutes. It's 8:15, so we've gone a little bit over, but I think Linda is happy to answer a few more questions if anybody has them. If not, yes, we will just say thank you. Oh, somebody says, will you see bear tracks this time of year?
Not if the winter goes as we expect it to do, which we'll get our normal signs of things warming up toward the end of February, maybe. I mean, sometimes it stays pretty cold into March. Sometimes we've had snow to April. Unless there was just a really bizarre early warming up, I would not expect to see bear tracks anytime soon. They are hibernating right now. Yeah.
Well, then thank you, Linda. Thank you all for coming. We'll send out, again, a follow-up email. It'll include a link to a survey about this presentation and about any other presentations you might like us to share with you. We're always looking for good topics to cover. And I want to thank you, and really thank you, Linda, so much. We really appreciate you giving your time and all this great information. Thank you.
This was great fun. And I just one last comment. Tracking takes some time and patience and effort. You have to keep looking at them. So go out and start looking at tracks, do your best, get a book, and don't give up just because some of it's confusing. It's something you work on for a lifetime, really. And the rewards are totally adequate. I mean, it's rewarding.
Well, thank you very much. We hope everyone has a good night. And again, we encourage you to go check out our website and check out our membership page. Make a donation if you feel so inclined. We appreciate it. We hope to see you again in another workshop in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Night. Okay. I guess
We'll watch all the little boxes go away. Thank you, Linda. This was really great. I'd like to talk to you once we kind of clear the room here.
Yep.
We missed some people because I didn't know that there was a cap of 100 people in this presentation, and so there were some people in the waiting room that weren't able to get in.
That's
So
too bad.
I'd love to talk with you about, and I don't know when, but maybe offering this again because it was so popular.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
That would be great. And it was informative, and I think I missed parts of the early parts of it because I was like distracted by emailing people, and that's why I feel like I missed it.
Yeah.
We'll have this recording on the website.
We will. Actually, thank you for reminding me. I'll stop recording while I'm talking about all my goofiness. There it is.